So I'm the last thing standing between us and drinks. So we have an option. How many would like to see the full 20 minutes? Wow. Okay, we won't vote on the 5-minute version then. So I'm JB, and it's my honor to be here, and hopefully after everything you've been through today, hopefully there's something else that we have to share that will be a benefit for you. The first thing we'd like to talk about is some observations and recommendations from our work through the past few years. The observations that I have come from work we've done on over 500 websites. And they come from our various services in forensics and some new services we have called Shopping Cart Inspect and Shopping Cart Monitor. The first item that is no big surprise is that hackers continue to increase the sophistication of their efforts in stealing credit card and payment information. And while they are increasing the ability to get in places where they had not been before, we see a great deal of effort today around hiding their work, hiding what they're doing. A good example of obfuscation comes from one case where you know that in HTTP you can put, you can post, you can get, and usually when you're sending data out of the browser, you post. Well, they were actually exfiltrating data with a get command by adding some of the parameters, the payload, if you will, in the get request, and we saw data going out through the get request. That's just that's an example of how they're hiding their work. The intermittent attacks has become an even bigger problem. We've seen cases where they only stole from customers coming from a certain country. They only stole from customers who would come in during a certain time of day. Realize that they can hide and do selective credit card payment theft by any parameter they choose to use inside the browser. One of the ones that we find particularly difficult is ads. We actually have evidence of an ad that came in through the checkout they had ads running during checkout. An ad came in and we have the evidence of the script that stole the credit card information from the one ad. We revisited that site another 20 times trying to see if the same ad would perform, and it did not. So ads become particularly difficult. The other information you need to know, and you probably would have figured this out, is that currently the environment in websites has changed dramatically from the last 5 to 10, 15 years. Early on with e-commerce and websites in general, all of the software that would run on the customer's browser typically came from the web server. And so many of our forensics investigations that we did, that's all we ever had to look at. Today, there are lots and lots of tools that all merchants want to use. It means that we see an average of over 20 of software coming from over 20 sites on average for the sites we look at. And the high we've seen was about 350. Can you imagine 350? Can you try and protect your website from 350 different servers providing scripts that are running during checkout? It becomes very difficult. Now, we have seen a few cases come from one of these third parties. A case that comes to mind was a very conscientious merchant. They were aware of all of the sources of scripts running in their environment, and they were monitoring them for their integrity. They also had a content delivery network that they used for their own software. Instead of it coming from their web server, they had a content delivery account, and in that account they had some of their own software. That was the only software they decided to ignore with their integrity monitoring of all the software that came into the browser. And it is the same site where a hacker got their credentials, went into their content delivery network, installed the malware that would steal the credit card information with every transaction. So this is a big problem. It's going to get worse going forward because it's just a huge environment of software coming from so many different locations. While this is going to be a problem, and it is somewhat of a problem today, the number one contributing issue for the work that we're seeing in breaches is good old-fashioned poor security. Much of it can be connected to the SAQA concept, where a merchant either is an SAQA merchant or believes that they are an SAQ merchant when they really are not. This is where we see most of the breaches that we investigate at SecurityMetrics. It could be a contributing factor to this next issue. A year or so ago, we had a particularly challenging case. We knew from the card brands that credit card information was continuing to be stolen. We were not the first PFI to investigate this site. It was particularly challenging. And then we brought in, actually, pen testing came in to actually help us out. And we discovered a very unique, I will call it elegant, attack that circumvented the payment gateway iframe. Now, this is not a new concept because since the iframe has been there, going back years, there's been something called we call a two-step approach. And that is when they have a payment gateway iframe, the hacker makes a copy of it, they host it locally, they put it up in the checkout, the merchant or the customer puts their data in, they steal it, and they put up a message that says, "You made a mistake. Please re-enter the payment information." At which point they would put up the proper payment gateway iframe, collect the data, and post it to the processor. This was very easy to detect. This is not. This one-frame attack is very smooth. Nobody knows it. There's no visible telltale signs. Even when you look under the hood to try and see what's going on, it's very difficult to detect. So instead of trying to give you all the details here, in our little booth here at 6:15, we have a pre-recorded technical discussion of how iframe circumvention works. The demonstrator will be our head of penetration testing, Chad, and after the demo, we'll actually have Chad and one of our forensics investigators live for anybody who has any additional questions on top of that technical demonstration. So, based on our work, our recommendations for the future are the web server and the web development needs to be more secure. Duh, right? It seems sort of as a given. Secondarily, merchants need to know the software that's running on their website. In many cases, we go into the environment, we identify all of the sources of JavaScript and the JavaScripts themselves. We mention to the merchant, you have these things running in your checkout process. They say, no, we don't. They're right here. We saw them. And they go, oh, really? Many merchants have no clue all of the software that's running, and that needs to change. They need to know and authorize the software running on their site. And lastly, it's time that we had monitoring of the integrity of the checkout process. And we are ecstatic that 4.0 addresses all of these issues because it will help actually take a bite out of crime. It will make hackers have to do more work and be more sophisticated if they want to continue stealing at the same rate that they are stealing today. Now, a little bit about some of the products and services that we have that are relatively new that are helping in this area. The first one is called Shopping Cart Inspect. Shopping Cart Inspect is an abbreviated forensics. We actually have a forensics analyst do this work. Now, years ago, in one of our cases, we noticed that when you come into the browser and you're going to the checkout process and you enter your payment information, at this point in the process, you've entered the who you are, your credit card number, and your expiration date. And typically the hack has not manifested itself yet. But what would happen is, as soon as the sensitive authentication or CVV information was entered, all of a sudden, a hack would appear from who knows where. Some software was waiting in the back room, waiting to pounce on the data after the CVV information was entered, because at that point, you typically have all of the information you want to steal. This is before the submit button is normally pushed. So we decided that for our inspection process, we needed to do a similar activity. One, we could no longer only investigate the server. We had to investigate the browser, the client-side environment. And two, we had to exercise the form. We had to enter real valid data so that the hack would sort of manifest itself. So this is the nature of our shopping cart inspect. Our analyst goes in, selects a product, goes through checkout, enters valid credit card information, clicks on the submit button. We block it so that it doesn't cause a bogus transaction for the merchant. But then we have all of the information that came into the browser for our analysis. And we have categorized our findings in 3 buckets, 3 categories. Concerning. The most common concerning item, and we have many, there's many findings in each category, but the most common concerning one is not using an iframe or not using it properly. Suspicious. The most common suspicious one is something old, Magento 1, or some other software that is out of date or unsupported. That's the most common thing we see. And the most common malicious activity is a double post, meaning they're posting to the processor and they're posting somewhere else. Sometimes we'll see a double post back to the server. Sometimes we'll see a double post where the second one is a known malicious site. But a double post we always flag as being a problem. We first started using these with CPP or forensics cases, suspected forensics cases. Now we sell these to small merchants. Every day, almost every day, we sell 1 or 2 or 3 of these. And interestingly, I did not think we would be finding hacked or malicious sites. The rate is slightly smaller for discovery, but we're finding sites that are already breached from small merchants who simply said, well, would you take a look at my site? And lo and behold, they've been breached. So Shopping Cart Inspect is a one-time inspection. Shopping Cart Monitor is a recurring analysis against a baseline of activity in the checkout process. And it's very effective. So how do we go about this? Well, we thought about putting software in their environment and opted not to do that. Our concern was that software might be able to be defeated by other software, particularly if the web development or the web server environment is accessible to the hacker. So what we do is, again, we exercise the checkout. We go through, we turn on the record, and we record our session, picking a product, going through checkout, entering card data, and hitting submit. We have all of the data that came into the browser from that. Our first analysis is to double check that they were not breached already. It would not be a good idea to establish the baseline if you're already hacked. So we actually have discovered some merchants in the setup process were already breached, and we requested that they fix things before we proceeded. The second item that we do is to identify key activities that we notice in the browser, and we put parameters on those key activities so that we can automate viewing these key activities in subsequent visits. So when we see those key activities, based on the parameters we use, we can say, that fits the parameters, that fits the parameters, that fits the parameters. No, that's a problem. It doesn't fit the parameters. Somebody should take a look. And then we schedule this to run however often the customer would like. It can be weekly, daily, hourly, or even more frequently. When an alert happens, one of 2 things will happen. The first thing we're checking is to see if it has been breached. if it's a malicious site. This investigation is done by our Security Operations Center, who has all the tools to investigate the destination, the users, the type of code, etc. And if it has been breached, we make a phone call right away. We notify people immediately. It also could have been maintenance or changes to the website where a new baseline needs to be established for this new edition going forward. So we will make that adjustment, and the merchant or customer doesn't need to be notified if we're clearly able to see that it has been updated. This is a wonderful tool. It requires no installation by the customer. The impact of this service is equivalent to one user visiting the site and making a purchase. So it really doesn't have any impact. And the nicest part is it is effective. We have already seen multiple cases where yesterday they were not breached, today they have been breached. We have the evidence. We can notify them immediately that they have a problem, identify the source of the exfiltration code so they can address it. And then they need to do some more research to figure out how it got in there to begin with. But we can notify them the day that we notice it. I guess it doesn't need to be said, but there's a certain airline that if this had been available to them, could have saved them a lot of money. As the saying goes, a stitch in time saves time, money, and perhaps somebody's job. So again, we hope that you will come down and see at 6:15. We have this technical demo. We have a monitor set up and a speaker, so hopefully everybody can hear it. And then we'll have 2 technical resources available live after that presentation for any questions that you may have that I can't answer. Thank you very much, and thanks for being here at the very last of a long day. Have a good evening.